Today's podcast episode is sponsored by the Reconnective Healing Global Community. I don't know if you guys remember, but back in 2020, we released an episode with Dr. Eric Pearl and Jillian Fleer about reconnective healing. He was a chiropractor who was working in his practice in Los Angeles, and his patients started to report that they were having these healings just with his hands being near them without him actually touching them. So he went on to research and try to find out what this universal wisdom was behind what was happening, and he developed the reconnective healing process. Their website is thereconnection.com, and they are offering an online level 1 class called The Portal to awaken your own healing ability and to learn how to do this. There's over 8 hours of interactive content where you will learn to interact with energy, light, and information to experience lasting knowingness, peace, and love without limitations. They gave us a coupon code to give to all of our listeners. It is Path2Portal. We're going to put that in the show notes, and that's 25% off of the Portal online level 1 course. I hope you guys enjoy. Let me know if you take it. Send me an email. Would love to know how the course works for you. Hi, and thanks for tuning in to the Path 11 podcast. I am your host, April Hanna. At the Path 11 podcast, we are here trying to deliver leading-edge research on consciousness, healing, and metaphysics. And just like you, we are trying to answer the big questions about life. Who are we? Why are we here? And what is our purpose? We hope by listening to our podcast, it will make each day you live on Earth a little easier to understand. And now for today's podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast. I have a really interesting guest, and I have to say, when the publicist kind of pitched this person's bio to me, and it was one of the books that he had written, I was like, I don't know if it really fits on the Path 11 podcast. But we talked a little bit more, and then as I delved into my guest's website and his story, I realized this is actually a really perfect guest. And this is a guest who has lived a lot of life. And so there's a part of me that feels like whether we're talking about spirituality or not, I love to sit across from somebody who has lived a lot of life and feel like that they have a lot that they can teach me. So my guest today, I'd like to introduce you to John Lefebvre. And he's a colorful character, I guess you could say. He has worn many hats in this lifetime. He was a choir boy, a lawyer at one point, a construction person that worked in labor, a house designer. He came to public attention when he landed one of the biggest .com Wheel of Fortunes with NetTeller, which was an online money transfer platform for the internet gambling industry. Back in 1969, he got arrested for his first time, selling some hash and some LSD. Then he got arrested again in 2007. And, he's been to prison, and he's written 2 books, and he's produced a couple of music albums. And he's a social activist now, an environmental and social activist. He's an author of 2 books, like I said, a musician. His 2 books, All Is Well and Good with Money. And I just feel like this man has a lot to talk about and a lot to teach us. So, John, welcome to the Path 11 podcast.
It's a great honor, really, to be here. I know people say things like that, but, our society is a little bit different than previous societies in one particular way, and that is one of the most important things that we can pay to people now is attention. And I'm very grateful to be receiving that gift from you now.
Yeah. So, let's talk. I don't even know where to start with you, right? So it's like you've had a lot of different experiences. Like I said, you've worn many, many hats, yet you've come back around in some ways to really focus on environmental awareness and consciousness and, just healing for the human species in general. But I'd love for you, if you could, to recap a little bit about like what you said before we hit record, that you kind of learned a lot when you were 17 and you're trying to live up to that now of the lessons that you learned back then.
Yeah, I know it sounds a little bit funny, but, I tell people sometimes, April, that, the most important things I've learned in my life, some of them are I learned when I was 17. That was 1969. It was a year when, young kids were running around, disobedient of the American government, President Nixon, Vice President Spiro Agnew went to prison. We really liked that. Vice presidents should go to prison more often. I grew up a good little Catholic boy, and my mom was a single mom. My father died when I was 3. My mom had 3 kids, and she raised us alone, went to school, became a teacher, and then ultimately got a postgraduate degree and became a high school guidance counselor. And so, unfortunately, she was able to, at St. Mary's Girls High School, where she worked, she was able to warn all of the students about me in advance. So I couldn't get away with anything. I was, very, extremely fortunate. I think one of the main parts of my thesis is that we in Western society are ridiculously fortunate compared to like 75% of the rest of the world. And, there are a lot of things that we take for granted. Of those fortunate people, I just by dumb luck landed in like the top drawer. I was, down about $100,000 after university and looking around for a more fulfilling job than being an interested lawyer, which I was. And one of my clients came up with this idea of, somebody brought some, professionalism, responsibility, reliability, security to the online money transfer side of the online gaming industry, that would be possibly a successful business model. Well, he asked me to help it along. And, 3 years later, we went public on the London Stock Exchange and, achieved a market cap of around $2 billion. And I had 27% of that. So, arguably at one point in my life, I was worth about $500 million, which is pretty ridiculous. Gave me some fame that I'm not really I don't cherish quite as much because, there are other things that I would prefer to be known for than, dumb luck. Mm-hmm. Well, a little bit of hard work, but mostly dumb luck, which is what we struck on they called it the dot-com boom, I think, in those days. Do I sound like a grandpa talking about the dot-com boom?
No, I understand it. I understand it. I'm not too young from you.
It was pretty unusual at the time because there were companies like, Amazon and Google and stuff like that were, going at, 1,000 and 10,000 times their earnings multiples on the stock market, because they weren't able to prove up any revenue at all. And by the time NetTeller went public on the London, we were showing, like $14 billion worth of transactions in the year that we were arrested.
Right. So why were you arrested? Was it because you guys were just making a ton of money, or because it had to do with gambling and was money being traded in a way that shouldn't have been?
Ostensibly, it was about gambling. I think gambling is illegal in most of the United States, but the reality is that 48 of the 50 states operate gambling themselves. So for us, it's a pernicious vice if we do it, but for governments, it's, good tax policy. So we never really felt that we were like offside in any moral sense. But we were, a little bit concerned, but not concerned enough that we might be offside in other ways. And they did come after us. We weren't doing anything different than Western Union and MasterCard and all the rest of them were doing too. They were all transferring money for the same industry. But, first of all, we weren't Americans. And secondly, we weren't, first day to the company that owns Western Union, so they didn't ever see, or Wells Fargo or Citibank, all of those. It would have been more politically difficult for the American authorities to go after local companies, but when they found a Canadian one that they could go after. Another thing that was going on at the time, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'll tell you this because it's a little bit interesting. The enforcement of justice in the United States just began to be aware that there is huge money to be made in forfeitures. So when we were finally sentenced and convicted, we forfeited $240 million. And like my company, 140 million, and my partner and I, 100 million. We split. Soon after we were arrested, everybody in the world was doing online gaming anyways. And, the U.S. Department of Justice that got a new focus. They thought, wow, these forfeitures are really something, and they turned their eyes to Wall Street for, money laundering and for insider trading and those sorts of things. So their attention kind of fell off us a little bit. But curiously, ultimate beneficiary of all crime in the United States, monetary crime, is the government, because the government ultimately arrests everybody and makes them forfeit all the money. So it's sort of an interesting perspective on the way justice works in America. And I support it. I'm a big fan of American, what, in my book, I wrote a book, All's Well, Where Thou Art, Earth and Why. And, what the last chapter of it, the epilogue, is a restatement of the Declaration of Independence, but for everybody. So, and that's what I'm all about. That's what my book's all about. The Declaration of Independence is absolutely the best statement of humanitarian ideals of any statement I've ever read. If there's a fault with it, it's not in its construction, it's in its execution. Execution has not been, it's been pretty good, but not stellar. When it says all men are created equal, first of all, men means people, right? But it took a long time for, us old patriarchs to let go of that idea. So all means all, not just Americans, all people are created equal. And so, and that was sort of what inspired me through my career of thinking and writing, was trying to figure out how to understand, how to help the world understand that, living in the privilege that we live in the West, we call it, is we take so many things for granted. But one of the things that we take for granted is that, sort of, I can't help it if I'm lucky. We're lucky. Well, the rest of the world isn't lucky. We're lucky. Okay, well, let's go golfing. Let's go mountain biking, whatever. And that didn't sit well with me. So most of my life, I've been thinking about these things. But when I got wealthy, I had an opportunity to actually demonstrate what I thought about things a little bit. So I started giving money away to people who deserved it, sometimes to people who didn't. And so just the idea of it for me was to, let me go here, if I might, April, to start. So many of the things that we take for granted in our society, we don't even notice. Like in our free societies, we take it for granted, more or less, that we should have, integrity and security of the person. We should have reasonable access to food, clothing, and shelter. We should have reasonable access to the tools of self-improvement, education, those things. We should have reasonable access to help, the tools, and also reasonable access to justice and to basic finance. We don't talk about those, but we sure as hell expect them. And last but not least, reasonable access to a healthy environment. We take all of these things for granted. And I think the reality of it is, April, is that we should take them for granted, because they are fundamental basics. We almost take it for granted that most people are entitled to those things. Even in America, they built hospitals for poor people,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As strict as they can be about selfishness in some other ways. So when I began to, cogitate about it, and I would say, so I think we are entitled to those things, and we should feel entitled to them, because actually I think everybody is. But then that leads to the question, well, what distinguishes us from everybody else in the world who does not enjoy the fortune that has befallen us, mostly by dumb luck of birth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very difficult to find an appropriate distinction. There really isn't one. The starving lady in the deserts of Somalia with an infant dying at her breast that yields nothing but dust and whimpers is exactly the same as us in one very, very, very miraculous way. And that is, we have the same consciousness. We are the same thing in that way. We are consciousness. We are the universe's vessels of consciousness. We have the same capacity to dream and the same capacity to be disappointed.
Mm.
Imagine how disappointed we would be if we were that lady. Well, I tried to put myself, in their shoes, and it became quite obvious to me that, yes, we are entitled to all of those things that we take for granted in our Western society, but those things come at a price. And the price that they come at, they are actually the elements of freedom. Those 7 things I said to you, that security and respect for the person, access to food, clothing, and shelter, education, healthcare, finance, justice, and a healthy environment. they are the basic elements of freedom. Freedom comes at a cost. Ever since we were kids, or, we were told that, freedom comes at a cost. And we used to think it was, that you have to give up your life. Men had to give up their life to fight for freedom. And, that sort of made sense to me, but in a way it doesn't, because only 1 in 100,000 or 300,000, I don't even know what the arithmetic is, ever pay that price, and everybody else gets it for free. I don't know.
Right.
I don't think that's it. I think the cost of freedom is actually quite a bit higher than that. It is that, plus every moment that we enjoy freedom, I think we have an obligation to strive in any way we can to make sure that everybody else, every other human being, is on a path to enjoying that too, enjoying exactly those same basics that we take for granted. That has some very, very difficult implications and some very fascinating ones too, but that's the basis of my thesis, that, how do we achieve that? How do we get there? It's, it's obvious, very, very obvious challenges, particularly when we face, corporate disinterest in other people's well-beings, and sovereignty is another very difficult, sovereignty between nations. It's none of our business what they do in Rhodesia. I don't know, if they start, if they're cutting off people's clitorises in Nigeria, is that none of our business? It's hard for me to imagine that's none of our business. But there's some very difficult things about implementing what I'm, putting forth as sort of my social objectives. But it's kind of like being a parent. When we're parents, we know we have an obligation to help develop our kids in every way we can. And a lot of the time, we don't know how we're going to do that. We don't know what steps we're going to take to do that. But not knowing the steps we're going to take does not absolve us of the responsibility. We have to figure out the steps.
Right.
And that's so that's the big. I'm going to be quiet now and let you back onto your show.
No, yeah. So I guess my one of my questions is, right, what we are all consciousness, right? So mine is, yours is that the homeless woman, it's the woman whose clitoris is getting cut off in Nigeria. But how do you move in the world with feeling such an overwhelming responsibility? Like, some people will say, like, what could I really do for those people in Nigeria? And does consciousness, do we have to bring it back to just how can we be better within our own consciousness and hope that then has a ripple effect? Because can everyone really create some change, whether it is, maybe some people don't have the dumb luck or the finances to really be able to put forth money, but maybe they can just be really good conscious beings in their small little town and still have a grand effect on the overall consciousness.
That's absolutely right. I would add one little shift to it, but it's, we must strive in accordance with our tools. Right? Whatever the tools that are available to us.
Right.
But the very first point of it, the very first step of it, is to encourage others to understand that we have this responsibility. We have, we might even approach this not even on the basis of responsibility, but on the basis of love. We actually care for that woman in Somalia when we take long enough to think about it. Right? And that ought to be motivation enough, but if it's not, then it becomes responsibility. And but I hate to seem mercenary about this, but my book is about all of these principles. And that's the first step, is understanding the principles. So if somebody if there's nothing else that they can do in their life, they can, tell people about my book.
Right.
But it's a consciousness thing. I mean, as soon as we become conscious of our relationship with all other human beings on the planet, it's hard for us to not bring it up in discussions with others, encourage people to look at the world that way, to be more positive about it, to have a more take the long view more frequently than we do in our society. We tend to take, what our main view is next year's annual report or the 5-year plan, right?
Right.
David Suzuki's the guy I work with. He was sitting up on a mountain with some First Nations guys up here in Haida Gwaii, which is one of the ancient First Nations in Western Canada on the coast. And this First Nations fellow was talking to David, their forestry up in the area. And the guy from the forestry company was saying to him, I want to tell you about our 5-year plan. And the guy says, I don't care about your 5-year plan. I want to hear about your 500-year plan.
Mm.
We've been here for 14,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Your 5-year plan is of little interest, So taking the long view of who we are and what we could be, we've developed, in constitutional democracy, the strongest tool ever invented by the human species to control the selfish wealthy. Now we just have to learn how to use it properly.
Right. Yeah. So what I hear you saying too is like really looking at the bigger picture, and this responsibility that we have for other humans is really kind of what I'm taking away from this is how can we step outside of ourselves, and not just think about ourselves, our world, but really extending that out further and further and further. And like you said, not the 5-year plan, the 500-year plan really makes you think, well, what's the footprint? When I die, what's the legacy? How many people have I really helped? Or how many people am I going to harm if I don't wake up or, begin to think about others?
Or even just encouraged. How many people have I encouraged?
Right.
We discourage young people when we say to them things like, government never does anything right. They only put their hands in our pockets and rob our money. Those are terrible, terrible things to tell our young people. And when we do tell them things like that, what we're actually doing is we're sending the message of the selfish wealthy. The selfish wealthy want us to not care about government. They want to tell us how government doesn't work. Stay home. You might as well go mountain biking. Why? Because they fear the powers to tax and to regulate. And the reason the way the marker that demonstrates how much they fear the powers to tax and regulate is how much money and energy they spend trying to avoid us grabbing a hold of those levers of power, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I have no problem with wealthy. I think wealth is a wonderful thing. If we're going to do all the things I think we need to do on the planet, wealth is going to be one of the things we need a lot of. And, to me, capitalism is one of the very best ways to accumulate wealth. The only thing that's wrong with capitalism, in my mind, is our failure to tax it properly and to regulate it properly. And we have those powers. All we have to do is enthusiastically grasp the levers of power in constitutional democracy and use those powers to make sure that the selfish wealthy pay their fair share and follow the rules. You don't dump mercury into Love Canal.
Mm-hmm. So
anyway, that's the consciousness part of it is if we get people thinking about these things the right way, that's a huge step and that's enough. That's paying the price of freedom, is just to get people to think about their reality more carefully.
Now, what I'm going to say to you might sound naive, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on it, because sometimes when I go out to the bigger picture, and again, like I said, maybe this is a naive way to look at it. Like, isn't money in the big grand scheme of things also an illusion? If we're really thinking about consciousness and our experience here on earth, and I understand from a lot of guests, like, this is a great school. We come to earth, we incarnate on earth in order to be able to evolve our consciousness. Sometimes I feel like we can get so wrapped up in money and the ego getting attached to that we lose sight of what it means to actually be a human being and to be here. And sometimes I feel like the involvement of politics and this and that, like sometimes even gets us further away from love or getting intertangled or in bondage with money. Because, does it really matter in the long run? Like, isn't all of this a little bit of an illusion of what we're living?
It's not naive, but it's a mistake that lots of people make.
Okay.
And here's the essence of it. What you say about money isn't a comment about money. It's a comment about how we view it. And it's a poor carpenter that blames their tools, right? It's not money that makes us selfish. Money is one of the major things that we can be generous with. How can you be generous if you don't have any money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, generous of spirit is super important too. I don't mean to diss that, but so I think we have to kind of maybe reconsider how we value money. You know, if we're mixing it up with our self-esteem, the more money I have, the more important I feel to myself. That's a monk's game. You know, that's not going to take you anywhere. You're going to be lying on your deathbed and you're going to be saying, I should have listened to Lefebvre. I should have been more generous. Right? Because, and the reason we say that on our deathbed is because we know then that the most precious thing that we can have when we're lying on our deathbed is gratitude. The most precious thing we can have is a whole bunch of people who were thinking, God, this world would have been a different place without April.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's value, and there's value in that runs much deeper than money. So it's not money's fault. It's how we view money. I think, you know, if we're thinking that, you know, money is going to make us happy, I'm going to say that's true, but only if we use it the right way. And the only way money can make us happy is if we're generous with it, you know, and then, you know, 10 years later, somebody walks up to you and says, you saved my life. What? Well, you know, I just about lost our house and you gave us $2,000 for 2 months rent. And then I kind of turned everything around and now my whole life is good. And I blame it all on you. So, you know, I coughed up $500 and somebody thinks I saved their life. They're going to spend their whole rest of their life being so grateful that they've ran into just that one person. And it's astonishing to me all day long how, you know, just, you know, you go into a restaurant and some young person there is trying their best to, you know, save up enough money to go to school again next year and all this stuff. And they, you know, you think, well, should I tip them 10 or 15%? Oh, I'll go 15%, you know, she's a good kid. I give them $100. Mm-hmm. They go, I'm sorry, you've made a mistake here. They chase me out of restaurants.
Right.
I'm sorry, I think you made a mistake here. No, the customer's always right. I think money can make you happy, but only if we use it in the most, you know, in a generous way, as well as all the other ways we use it.
Yeah. Well, I know that there is another way that you've used money in a very generous way, and you helped to fund the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education in Vancouver. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's one of the blessings of my life is I've spent a little bit of time with His Holiness. He invited me for you know, what do they call it? You know, when you just go visit the guy alone. Mm-hmm. There's a word for it. Don't get old. It escapes me. An audience. And he said, you know, you can bring anybody you want, one person. And so I brought my mom. And my mom was, you know, about 80 at the time or something like that. And then it was, you know, it was a lovely time. I had a little soul patch there. And he says, oh, I got something new in there. Right? He's a very lovely guy. But my friend Victor Chan ran in with the Dalai Lama in the 70s. Victor was, you know, hijacked by some rebels in Afghanistan. And somehow it came to His Holiness's attention because he had been sojourning through or near Afghanistan at the time. And somehow or other, you know, Dalai Lama got Victor and the lady that he was running around with at the time out of trouble in Afghanistan. And then Victor devoted his life to helping His Holiness he's co-written a couple of books with him and that sort of thing, right? So, and Victor lives in Vancouver and I got to know him. And, you know, Dalai Lama doesn't lend his name to much, you know, but he permitted us in Vancouver to set up the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. The main thrust of it is education of the heart. And his theory is, and I think it's a very strong one, and that is if we teach young people, our children, how to unfold the love that lies within them, they become better prepared in every way for everything that comes. You know, we're better learners, we're better listeners, we're better, you know, authority, better governance. You know, all of the different things that we do are improved by having, you know, this more expansive view of what we care about. You said before something about stepping outside ourselves. I'm going to say that I understand what you mean by that, and I don't want to be nitpicky about it, April, but I just want to help us understand what we say. I don't think we need to step outside of ourselves. We just need to step beyond, right? Our self isn't something that we need to step out of. We just have to kind of like grow it out into Sharesiesville.
Expand it, right? Expand
yes.
ourselves. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And so, you know, one of the things that you have done with your money, like you said, is share it and give it away and try to make it useful and use it as a way to help others. And I've also heard that, kind of the laws of the universe says like the more that you give, the more that you get back. Have you found that to be true as well?
Well, I sleep a lot better now than I used to. And it's not because I lost $400 million.
Mm-hmm.
I've done not all I can, but I've done a lot to help others. And it just makes every day so much more rewarding. The rewards of generosity, the dividends of generosity are gratitude. And, there's it's a dividend that no amount of money could match in a way. It's a type of dividend that no amount of money or power could ever achieve. Right.
Right.
It's a different kind of wealth. It's the wealth of spirit, the wealth of being deeply in touch with ourselves and all others as well. And it's, it makes the world.
So I'm wondering what your thoughts are more in an esoteric terms. Like if I think about, okay, so the 2 times you got arrested, right? The one time LSD hash, the other time this money making gambling thing. But the energies of those things that you were providing for people has an element of addiction, right? And maybe keeping them very either earthbound or getting people involved in gambling that sometimes can be disastrous for families, for relationships, for people themselves, of losing money. And do you think, like in that esoteric term, that the universe in a way was trying to bring you back around to remind you of maybe you do have something, I don't want to say necessarily special, but that there is something with this dumb luck that you have that maybe the universe in a way is like, let's put it more towards this because you really have kind of maybe turn the way in which you give out into the world and how you give it and who you give it to. But some of your money was attached to things that could breed more addiction, chaos, entropy, within the world. Whereas now it feels like you're doing your job to kind of lower the disorder and bring more peace. So.
Yeah, I think, that is true, and I'm alert to that, and have been. People have brought that up, since the very early days of NetTeller, and I think it kind of beckons to the lawyer in me a little bit. But one of the things I want to say to respond to that is that I'm not sure if we ought to turn our backs on things that some people have a weakness for. I don't think it's a good idea for instance, to ban alcohol, right? Because a lot, I'm going to say, I don't know what the number is. 85% of people who use alcohol use it responsibly. And the way to help the 15% who cannot is not to make the 85% go without, I don't think. And I think the same thing goes with gambling. Gambling is something that people are going to do whether or not we support them at it. I mean, it's as old as, it might be the oldest profession, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
It might be the oldest profession. But I think, once again, it's not, gambling can be abused or it can, be the downfall of a person. But it's not gambling's fault, again. What we should be doing is making sure that the gambling industry pays its full fair share to look after people who need help.
Mm-hmm. So basically, you're kind of turning it over to the individual responsibility of the person. Like what you're saying is like, we shouldn't necessarily take alcohol away or the casinos away, but really it has to come to that person's evolution of their own individual consciousness to make choices, to work out their own karma.
I don't think that is what I mean.
No. Okay.
I think it's the individual is the one who makes trouble of them, right? But we have to be realistic too and understand that, when we burn gasoline or when we go gambling or when we drink or when we take heroin, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are doing something that some people fall prey to. So if we're going to permit it, we also have to be grown up about it and help the people who fall by the wayside from those things that we take to be, well, let's say it out loud, our freedoms. Americans think that they should be free to gamble. I don't blame them. I think they should be. Yes, it causes problems. Americans think they should be free to snort cocaine. They sure take enough of it. They may, those guys in Colombia didn't get rich on Colombian money.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But what we have to do is when we understand that when we legalize those drugs, and we will eventually, because, everybody knows now that the criminal process isn't the way to govern them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But what we're going to realize is we will permit people to use those things freely, as long as they use them responsibly. But we have to understand too that it causes problems, and we have to contribute to the solution of those problems for those people. Once again, it's like the same thing. I can't help it if I'm lucky, a reason to not spread freedom to everybody else. I'm lucky, they're not. Let's go dancing. No. And it's not a good enough reason to say, well, I get to take cocaine because I'm responsible about it, but somebody else can't, And incidentally, I don't do cocaine, but, or at least not since, 40 years ago, one party maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly would not promote it. But I also think that, making it illegal is, that only does one thing. It makes people rich.
Mm-hmm.
It makes criminals rich, but people are still going to do what they're going to do. When you live in the land of the free and the home of the brave, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yet you have to expect your kids to grow up being both free and brave, and they're going to do whatever they want. So anyway, so these things, we call them vices. Some people think, sex is a vice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, should we ban sex? I don't think so. That's not the right solution. The solution is to understand that there are things in our society that people fall prey to, and it speaks more, in my mind, to our responsibility to help people who have fallen than, it's once again, it's like it's the carpenter blaming the tools. It's the heroine's fault. Well, no, it's not. Everybody knows that an addict deep down inside them has a hole that they're trying to fill that can never be filled by the drugs, but it feels like it fills it for a little while. So they go there. What we need to be doing for drug addicts, right, is to make up for that hole that was built in them by their parents or by society or whatever it is who've made them feel rejected and useless. And that's our responsibility. So if we do that, then if we do that and be responsible and grown up about it, then, I think it's okay if at New Year's Eve, sometimes people have a little bit of fun.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I mean, what you're saying is kind of going to healing the root cause. You don't want to put all addicts on an island where there's no drugs and no alcohol and say, okay, now you're safe here. It's like, how do you also teach people to integrate within the world? Right. Yeah. And heal them and allow them to be amongst these things, but maybe they feel freer in their own choice to engage or not engaged, with that void or that trauma being healed within them. Yeah. Makes sense.
So I don't know if that satisfies your problem with me raising money, gambling. But if I had it to do over again, I would do exactly the same thing and make way more money still. But I would have avoided getting arrested, so I could keep that $300 million and use it, for what I think good is. Rather, the day I was arrested, in 2006, I think it was, yes, or maybe at the beginning of 2007, America was fighting a war in Iraq, and I read that that they were spending $2.5 billion a week fighting a war in Iraq, right? And I calculated that the $240 million that we forfeited wouldn't get them till coffee time Monday morning in that week, right? So it's a massive amount of money that America spends on war, and then deciding that 75% of Americans probably gamble, one way or another. If it's not bingo, it's buying the lottery tickets, down at the 7-Eleven.
Right. And scratch offs. Yep.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Well, interesting. I think you expanded, my knowledge on some things, gave me a couple of things to chew on, to think about, in a different way, and kind of going back to those 7 principles. So I want to give you the opportunity to just let people know where they can find you, your books, if you'd like to mention both of your books, and also your music. I listen to your music on Spotify. I have to ask, I felt a little inspiration of Neil Young a little bit in there. Yeah.
I'm a classic rock guy. I do. I am. There's one of the ways I described it was, if people say, what kind of music do you do? And I go, well, what kind of music is the Beatles' White Album? It's all over the map, right? I mean, it goes everywhere, but it's all, I tell people sometimes, whatever kind of music you like, you'll find somebody here, something here you don't like.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But
my music.
Go ahead. Where can people find you?
My music's on the streaming services, as you said. So if you spell my name right on your podcast, I'm sure you will. You can find it there. Also, johnlefebvre.com. My website has all the music. You can listen to it there, and also have a look at my 2 books there. The one book, All's Well, Where Thou Art, Earth and Why, is my sort of treatise, my thesis about who we are as a species, how far we've come, and how far we have not come, how far we've got to go. And primarily what it's about is, the principles that we might adopt if we want to actually improve the advance of civilization. I know that sounds preposterous, but that is what that book is about. And it's also quite a bit gonzo as well. So don't worry, it's not all, it's not all boring. The other book is called Good with Money. It's a rich guy's guide to gaining everything by losing it all. It's a little bit more of a sort of a biographical. It's about my story, rags to riches and back halfway to rags again. And it's more for people who are more interested in that kind of perspective on it. It's sort of the same thing, but how I lived it rather than how I talk about it. So there it is. We've got a johnlefebvre.com for my books and my music. And on Facebook, I have a page. They call it a page. And the page is called Thoughtful Species. And Thoughtful Species has about 20,000 followers now. And it's just things that I pick up from myself and my companions that are smart to read today. And, and then occasionally I throw in some of my own. So Thoughtful Species on Facebook and johnlefebvre.com. Those are the 2. I'd be grateful if you'd promote for me.
Absolutely, will do. I didn't have the Facebook link, but I will definitely take that and I'll put it in the show notes. I'll put all of those links in the show notes. So it'll be very easy for our listeners to just click and find you and join the group and listen to some music.
Thanks, April.
All right.
I'm very, very grateful for you having me here today. And I want to say to all of your listeners, there is a miracle inside you. It's the part of us that dreams at night does not go to sleep when we wake up. The part of us that dreams at night, if we're good to it, if we love it ourselves, what we would do is take half an hour each day and push away all of those incessant thoughts that fill our minds. They're all good. They're all responsibilities, just not now. They're like, clients without an appointment. They're kind of like guests who didn't call first when they knock on your door. So, they can wait half an hour. Just sit quietly and let that part of us that dreams at night be awake in the daytime too. When we do that, magical things happen every moment. Look inside. There are our diamonds.
I love it. Beautiful way to end. Thank you, John, so much for being here. And thank you all for listening. And I promise to bring you another amazing guest next week. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. If you haven't already, please subscribe and rate and review the Path 11 podcast in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, this podcast is made possible by our sponsor, Path 11 TV. Visit path11tv.com to start a 7-day free trial and start streaming over 100 hours of exclusive video content on consciousness, healing, and life after death. That's path11tv.com, and be sure to use coupon code podcast30 to take 30% off your annual membership. Start satisfying your spiritual curiosity with a membership to Path 11 TV today. Bye for now.